Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth, Lies, and Nonsense. Today is the first topic I'm going to be talking about. It's my first time doing a podcast, so hopefully I can get this right. No opening music for today's episode. Today's episode, Restraining Orders. Yes, today we are going to discuss all three of those aspects as it relates to my personal experience with a temporary restraining order. And we're talking truth, lies, and nonsense. All right, we're back with truth, lies, and nonsense in our discussion of restraining orders. But first, a little bit about myself. Okay, where do we leave off? A little bit about myself. Well, I'm a former United States Marine Corps officer and a retired Federal Bureau of Investigation special agent. Retired several years ago from the FBI and began teaching law enforcement primarily at a foreign national law enforcement academy for a nation that wanted to upgrade their proficiency to U.S. levels. So what does that mean? It means I've kept my nose clean for over 30 years. No arrests, no charges, no complaints, etc. Do things pretty much by the book. I know the limits. I know what you can say and can do without crossing a line that would get yourself in trouble. So how did I get a restraining order, a temporary restraining order, pitted against me? Well, that's a good question. It was actually a domestic violence temporary restraining order. Now, the first reaction most of you have when they hear domestic violence is they think a husband against a wife. Well, I'm not married. Well, not anymore. I've been divorced for a few years, and no, the plaintiff was not my ex-wife or girlfriend or a woman for that matter. It was my younger brother. Yes, my younger brother petitioned the court for a domestic violence temporary restraining order. Perhaps you're scratching your head now, or perhaps you're thinking, I attacked or threatened my brother, because a restraining order is meant to protect somebody from somebody else. Well, I didn't attack or threaten my brother in any way. So how did a temporary restraining order get issued? Well, it all boils down to a legal system where you have judges that frankly just don't do their jobs. Judges that it seems don't even read what is written on the request for a temporary restraining order. They seem to be so nervous about making a mistake by denying one that they issue them carte blanche instead. They've decided it isn't even worth reading the request and analyzing what it says. They're that terrified that if they decline one, no matter how ludicrous the writing is on it, it exposes them if something were to happen, and they're not willing to take any risks when it comes to that. They merely just issue the temporary restraining and set an evidentiary hearing, usually about 2 to 3 weeks later. So they want an evidentiary hearing. You're like, okay, that's good. But 3 weeks later, well, that means for those 2 to 3 weeks, you actually have a temporary restraining order issued against you. Now, some might be thinking that is a reasonable decision by a judge. I'm here to tell you it is not. Even though issuance of a temporary restraining order brings a stigma of guilt akin with calling somebody a sexual predator, pedophile, once it is said, it cannot be forgotten by many people. How many politicians and public figures have been tainted by allegations that could later not be proven? We pay judges to be what that word means, a judge. And the judge means to look at what is presented and evaluate it. The judge that rubber stamped my brother's request clearly didn't even read it. Also, issuing a temporary restraining requires the defendant to turn all his firearms pending the evidentiary hearing. So I had to turn in my firearms to a licensed dealer or the police. I turned it into a licensed dealer, and they charged me a storage fee, which I had to pay for. Now, I'm a retired law enforcement. I run a PI company. I'm in situations where being armed is a nice security blanket for me. So now, with the temporary restraining issue me, I'm in a position of vulnerability. Vulnerability over nonsense, over a fictitious write-up application for temporary restraining order that any sane judge, had they read it, would have seen it was fictitious and should have declined it. Anyhow, I found out later when I went to recover my firearm that I must go through a background check and wait 10 days after the dismissal of the temporary restraining order to recover my firearm, a firearm I've owned for 30 years. I had to go without it for 21 days from the date the temporary restraining was issued until it was dismissed. And yes, it was dismissed. Before the evidentiary hearing, my brother petitioned for it to be dismissed. And we'll cover that in a minute. So it's dismissed. I go in there, pick it up, and I have to wait an additional 10 days for a background check for a weapon I've owned 30 years. And I have to pay for that background check. So now it's a month before I recover a firearm over a fictitious temporary restraining order. To add insult to injury, or at least financial injury, I was forced to hire an attorney to represent myself for the evidentiary hearing. It cost about $5,000. Now, why would I hire an attorney if I was completely innocent of all this and was fictitious? Well, as I mentioned earlier, judges are notoriously lazy and terrified to analyze the facts when it comes to restraining order applications. They just issue them. So the risk of my case being heard by one of these lazy judges was too great a risk to proceed without an attorney. If I got one of those completely lazy judges that really are more worried about their own skin than anything else, they may have discounted my testimony and my evidence and just erred on the side of caution, issued a restraining order just because it keeps them safe. Doesn't follow the law. It doesn't follow facts. It's more to protect themselves. And yes, you might have caught my comment earlier. My brother agreed to dismiss the TRO, temporary restraining order, prior to the evidentiary hearing. Why, you might ask? Well, in my opinion, he was facing perjuring himself if he testified at the nonsense and lies he wrote on the application for the temporary restraining order. He, as an attorney, had read my response to what was contained in his application. I rebutted every single sentence, every single line in his application with irrefutable proof and witnesses to back up my rebuttal. And no, I did not get my $5,000 back when it was dismissed from my brother. We would have had to have actually gone through the hearing and have the judge issue an order for my brother to pay back my attorney fees. I was advised that accepting the dismissal was a guarantee it was gone. Whereas if I had gone through with the hearing, I may have been facing one of those lazy judges that care more about themselves, care more about avoiding anything that might come back to haunt them than they do about actually judging the facts before them. So they just could possibly just issue it based on that alone. So that was a risk in my position I couldn't afford to take. So why did my brother pursue a temporary restraining in the first place? Well, we were in a business dispute over real estate and access to it. And he was losing that business dispute. It was a week before Thanksgiving, and they had planned a wedding at the real estate we jointly owned. We ran a wedding venue, and they had weddings booked there. He wanted to ensure I didn't have access to the property during the week and the weekend. I guess he was worried I was going to show up at the wedding and somehow interfere with it, or maybe I'd show up at Thanksgiving with my friends and try to use the property because we jointly owned it. So the best way to protect himself, I guess, against that was to go and get a temporary restraining order for 21 days, which would cover that period of time, which he did. And voila, I was barred from going to the property until after it was dismissed. Well, I had no real plans to go to the property. How he knew that, my attorney had been talking to them about that. But yeah, I think he just panicked more so because I think he was getting pressure from his wife to give guarantees that I was not going to show up during Thanksgiving or something like that. So voila, they got one. And it was issued against me. The biggest problem, one of the bigger problems that lies out there, it was dismissed. I'm free and clear of it, but it's still there in the court system that one was issued against me, a temporary restraining order. And yes, it does say it was dismissed. Well, like with everything, like we talked about before, politician allegations, celebrity allegations, they may be dismissed. Maybe they settle out of court and, non-disclosures are signed or whatever, but it follows them. It'll follow them forever. It's always going to be out there that somebody's still going to scratch their head and wonder, was there some truth in that? Well, I could sit here and read the different things he wrote in his temporary restraining order, but I'm just going to cover the major things that stand out as nonsense in it. Is on 3 different occasions in his application for restraining order, he claims that I had threatened to kill him. Yes, kill him, kill his wife, and kill his wife's 9-year-old daughter. Yes, kill was actually, and then also, apart from killing, I'd also threatened to kick and punch him and beat him up and make them homeless. Yes, those are words he used in the restraining order application. Now, the restraining order was issued, as I said, right before Thanksgiving in November. His application states that the first time I threatened to beat him up, kick him, and kill him, his wife, and his wife's daughter was back in March. March was 8 months earlier. Then again, he says, I threatened to kill, punch, and kick them in April, early April. I think it was April 5th. Well, that was curious because my birthday's in mid-April, and him and his wife attended a birthday party with me at a friend's house. So if I had threatened to kill my brother, his wife, and his wife's daughter 2 times in the preceding month, would they really celebrate my birthday? We were all still living at the property as we renovated it, so I was still living there. And they didn't get a restraining order back then, and they attended my birthday party. So now fast forward 2 months later, in June. In June, I left the property because things were becoming business-wise untenable. He was conducting inappropriate and, frankly, illegal business activities there, and I didn't want to have any part of it anymore because it was going to jeopardize my reputation. So I left the property. We were in this business dispute since June. Well, in October, I brought my real estate broker to the property and one of the other owners to inspect it because the other owner hadn't seen it in a long time. So they were notified that we were showing up on a particular weekend, and we did. They didn't let us know that they were actually having a wedding on the day we were showing up. So yes, unfortunately, we showed up during a wedding, which made things, well, it was actually a setup for the wedding, but it made things a little awkward there. Well, my brother came out. I videotaped the entire visit to the property is all videotaped by me and audio tape. Well, in his application, he cites that day. He says, during that day, I again threatened to kill him. I threatened to break into the house and actually physically and violently remove one of their friends from a room that I had been previously staying in. Well, I have all that on videotape, and that was turned over to the judge. Well, it was turned over to their attorneys first, my rebuttal, which is really probably why he was urged to dismiss it, because he couldn't get on the stand and claim those nonsense facts, those lies, when I had irrefutable evidence that nothing like that occurred. So I guess I'm ranting and raving really against the legal system and how you can get away with something like this. It's having worked in law enforcement for 20 years, I've seen a lot of crazy shit. I've seen a lot of nonsense. I've seen a lot of lies be treated like truth and a lot of truth treated like lies. But I was always basically immune from that because I was in the government. I was working cases. But now I understand more as a victim how a victim feels when they're confronted with something like this, something that is upsetting, financially damaging, reputation-wise damaging, and how judges are supposed to be protecting us in a way from that. They're supposed to be analyzing and reading. They're supposed to be educated people. I think probably most all judges have a law degree, so they've had training. They probably have some experience out in the field before they get appointed as a judge. I'm sure there's exceptions out there for judges that can be appointed for any number of reasons. So you ask yourself, how is it possible in America, in California, that you can walk in, fill out an application that is completely filled with lies, completely fictitious, made up, and some judge is going to slap a temporary restraining order against you, forcing you to turn in things like your gun, forcing you to keep your distance, forcing you to do things based on a lie, interfering with my civil rights, I would guess, my freedoms, and there's no recourse for me to get justice for that month and that anxiety against me, I can't sue them. I can't take them to small claims court. There's nothing I can do. I just basically have to grin and bear it. And it's frankly the most ridiculous thing I've encountered in my life, outside of the ridiculous things that happened and I saw on the job in the Marine Corps, which we'll discuss in other podcasts. But so that's it for this episode of Truth, Lies, and Nonsense. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be back with other episodes where I break down truth, lies, and nonsense.